Hey there, welcome to episode 105 of the Social Business Engine podcast, the podcast where I invite thought leaders from all industries to share their real-world expertise on social and digital communications best practices. I'm Bernie Borges from Find and Convert and your host of the Social Business Engine podcast. On today's episode, you are going to meet Stacy Jaffe. Stacy is the Managing Director of Social Media and Paid Ads at Teach for America, a not-for-profit organization that's focused on education equality for all children across America. Stacy oversees Teach for America's paid and owned social media. She leads a team of 5 full-time staff members while partnering with a variety of other teams. In this role, Stacy develops strategies to utilize social media metrics as a focus group to improve the social media experience for their various audiences. On this episode, we are going to unpack how Stacy achieves results through content and social media, much like a for-profit business. Now, this episode is sponsored by our very own Social Business Workshop for Business Development. This online workshop is delivered in both group and one-on-one coaching sessions. It's designed for business development teams who want to use social media channels to improve their sales results. This workshop has demonstrated that while training delivers results, coaching guarantees it. To learn more about this online workshop, just visit our website at socialbusinessengine.com/workshops. And now, here's my interview with Stacy Jaffe, the Managing Director of Social Media and Paid Ads at Teach for America. Stacy, welcome to the Social Business Engine podcast.
Thank you so much, Bernie. I'm so excited to be here talking with you.
Well, I'm excited as well. And Stacy, as you know, you and I, the way that we met was we're both fellow speakers at Social Media Strategy Summit, which at the time of this recording is coming up in Chicago in April. So for those of you that may be listening to this before that, check us out. Come visit us in Chicago. If you're listening after April, there's also Social Media Strategies in June in New York and also in San Francisco in September. So Stacy, let's begin with the obvious and let's introduce the world, my listeners, to Teach for America. What is the organization about? Tell us the rich history of Teach for America.
Absolutely. I would love to start there. So Teach for America is an organization that believes that a child's zip code should not determine their destiny. So there are 16 million children growing up in poverty in this country, and their opportunities, and really the lack thereof of their opportunities, are being determined by where they live. And Teach for America feels that this is a serious injustice. We believe this shouldn't be the case, that every child, regardless of where they are born or what their race is or how much money their parents make, deserves access to an excellent education. And we believe that we can solve this problem of educational inequity in our lifetime. And to solve this problem, Teach for America finds, trains, and places leaders as teachers in 52 regions around the country. Our teachers make a 2-year commitment to teach in low-income communities in the region that they are placed. And they can be placed anywhere from Appalachia to New York City to Jacksonville, Florida, and many other communities in between.
Wow. And how long has the organization been around?
We just celebrated our 25th anniversary in February.
Wow.
It's actually a great story of how we were founded.
I'd love to hear it. I think my listeners would too.
All right. Well, Teach for America began in 1989 as Wendy Kopp's senior thesis at Princeton University. Wendy proposed this idea that inequity of public education could be addressed by creating a teaching corps of high-performing college graduates to teach in high-need urban and rural schools. So actually, in December of 1989, Wendy gathered 100 part-time student recruiters from 100 different universities, and they really began Teach for America's first recruiting season. So what's amazing is 25 years later, obviously the organization has evolved a lot, but the roots of it are still in Wendy's senior thesis.
Wow. And at this point in your 25-year history, how many teachers have actually come through your organization?
So after you teach with us for 2 years, we consider you an alumni. And currently we have 50,000 alumni.
50,000. Wow. That is really impressive, especially when you look at what you're doing and the impact you're having on children across America. That is just phenomenal. Well, thank you so much for sharing that backstory, Stacy, because that really gives me and my listeners a really good context for Teach for America, the organization, the genesis of it. So let's get into kind of the meat of the conversation. And let's start with, how does Teach for America, because you're a non-profit organization, how do you use social media? And if I could kind of combine two questions into one, how do you use social media and how is it different than a for-profit organization?
I'm not sure that we use it differently than a for-profit organization uses it. I think at the end of the day, we have goals that we're trying to meet. I think the question is, what are those goals?
Okay.
So for us, social media is really about community and inspiring our community to advocate for us in a number of ways. We really need our community's help with three big goals. One, brand awareness and brand affinity, exciting our base to educate others about the issues of educational inequity. We need help with our second goal, recruitment. We're always looking for future teachers. And our third and final goal would be donations and donor loyalty.
Okay.
So for us, cultivating and growing this community, we spend a lot of time thinking about sort of the notion of the platinum rule. So you've heard of the golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated. Mm-hmm. And the platinum rule is treat others the way they want to be treated. So for us, abiding by the platinum rule is to figure out how they want to be treated, and we do this through social listening. My thesis at Teach for America for the 2 years I've been here has consistently been that social media is one giant focus group. It's about knowing your audience, understanding what they're thinking about, what conversations they're having about the issues in your space. So it's not only just the positive or the negative commentary about your brand, but it's also what they're saying when they're talking about issues in your space online that could give you insight into the conversations they want to have. So we play detective a lot around here, and we sort of go looking for what conversations is our audience having. So for instance, we might search out the teacher life hashtag on Instagram. We are consistently reading the subreddit on teachers, on Reddit, of course, and we really study it and really think about how does our audience talk to one another, what gets a great response, what doesn't get a great response, and we really think about the why. And this type of listening to the conversations happening sort of in our world, but not necessarily in our world, has transitioned into us really thinking through each piece of content before we even create it. So we really understand the purpose of the content, why we're creating it, what we think it speaks to, and we use this to ignite conversation so that we really activate this sense of community so that the community then goes forward to sort of help us reach our ultimate goals.
Wow. So, okay, let me see if I can read that back to you. So it's really about listening, and you really look at social media as one giant focus group. And then every piece of content, I want to dive deeper into that because I've heard you use the concept or the buzzword or the phrase content loop. So let's talk about that. What is the content loop and how do you use it?
I am so happy you asked. I love our content loop. So the content loop is the process by which we create and iterate content. And it takes into account how the audience sort of responded to the last piece of content or to the campaign overall that the content sits in, and how we look at it, assess it, and scale it up. So the process for us starts with listening, and listening sparks an idea for content. So we create that piece of content, we publish it, and then it gets amplified on our social media channels or maybe via email. And then for me, this is where the fun really begins. We look at our results, our social media metrics, and we iterate it from there. And then we listen again before we loop back to creating more content. So we are consistently thinking about the purpose of each piece of content, looking at sort of how it moves through our community, and thinking about what trends we spotted as we keep moving forward. So our loop is listening to creating, to publishing, to amplifying, to iterating and listening again, and round we go. So we do this for every single piece of content, and then we scale it up for our campaigns, looking for trends. What worked, what ignited conversation, what didn't work. So I'd love to give you an example of this in action.
Okay, before you do that, I definitely want to go there. So hold that thought for just a moment, because it occurs to me that a few minutes ago when I asked you the question about how you use social media at Teach for America and how is it different from a for-profit organization, I loved your response, and you said that it's really not different. And I think the content loop description that you just provided is a perfect illustration of that, right? I mean, every business on the planet, whether you're in business to produce a profit or you're a non-for-profit, should be doing exactly that. This content loop, listening, creating, publishing, amplifying, and then iterating again and continuing to listen and just continue to loop that. That's fantastic. I love that.
I love that you said that. I think it's such a great way to intersect where your audience is with what your business goals are and to really align both, because I really think there's a big overlap between what people want to talk about and likely what you are doing already, that you have created a business to meet a need.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you said that you'd love to give us an example. So how about an example?
Okay, here we go. So this is one of my favorite examples, and it's a story about Craig Bradenberg, who's one of our alumni. He's a teacher in Houston, and he's been teaching for more than 10 years. And at the beginning of the summer, Craig wrote a blog for us about teaching for the cycle. And teaching for the cycle is a phrase that Craig coined, and what it means is teaching all the siblings in one family. And it's really about having a meaningful impact because you understand the family, you understand the kids, and it really helps you understand your community. Mm-hmm. And as we looped through our content loop, when we amplified it, we saw that teacher after teacher wrote in to talk about the impact of teaching siblings and what they had learned from getting to know the family and how that had really changed their relationship with various students. And we were so thrilled with this because it was really a piece of content that met our goal of igniting conversations and instilling community. And as we're sort of thinking on that and looking for trends around that theme, we sort of moved towards the end of the summer, and I am attending a conference that Teach for America runs for our alumni. And while the conference is happening, I was doing in-the-moment social listening to look for trends during the conference and how we might want to move content in the minute. And I noticed that our mentions were filling up with talk of Craig Bradenberg, who was giving a presentation that moment, but people were referencing his blog from 3 months prior.
And how did you know it was about him? Were they referencing his name or a hashtag?
They were tweeting his handle.
Okay.
So, and his name as well. And so, and because we are lucky and we were just all physically there and physically present, a story editor for our website actually stood outside the room of Craig's presentation and grabbed him for a follow-up Q&A as he was leaving, based on the social media listening we were doing in the moment, that we knew that was a piece of content that we could loop really quickly and we could catch fire with. So between the first blog and the Q&A, Craig's story generated so much earned social media for us that we cycled that content loop one more time, and we invited Craig back to tell his story of teaching for the cycle live in front of a 15,000 person audience during our 25th anniversary summit.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really phenomenal. And again, we saw the social media mentions really kick up and really go. It was clearly such a topic that resonated with our teaching audience.
And what is your conference that had 15,000 attendees?
It was our 25th anniversary summit.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah. I can just imagine 15,000 attendees. That's a huge, I've been to an IBM conference that has that many, and it's huge, and that's a totally different environment. That must have been awesome.
It was unbelievable to stand in a room full of people who really believe that we can make kids' lives better and that we will do it, and that there's meaningful impact to be made and to break the cycle of poverty and see kids rise to success. So,
yeah, that's fantastic. So, Stacy, there's another element of your responsibility at Teach for America that is managing paid media. And before I ask you to elaborate on that part of your responsibility, I first want to just remark on it, and that is just to recognize that paid media is an important element, because a lot of brands, again, whether you're for-profit or not, really think of social media as quote-unquote free, right?
Yeah.
And you know, obviously, that's so far from the truth. So why don't you talk about what is your responsibility on the paid media side and a little bit about what you're doing there?
Yeah, so I couldn't agree with you more. I do not think that social media is free, and I think that we're going to see more and more paid media as the industry evolves and as all the different platforms that we interact on continue to evolve and grow. So paid media for me is really about recruitment, that we use it to bring in our teaching core for the following year. So for us, we're aware that it's a really big commitment for a potential recruit to raise their hand and say, this is so meaningful. I want to spend the next 2 years of my life doing this.
So when you say recruitment, you are talking about teachers, recruiting
Correct.
teachers. Okay.
Recruiting, yes.
Yep. Okay.
Recruiting people who are interested in joining our teaching core.
Okay.
And when we recruit someone and they apply to teach, they're in effect saying that they're willing to spend the next 2 years teaching with us.
Okay.
So because we know that's a big commitment, we spend a lot of time thinking about our customer journey and what it means to move someone through the conversion funnel. So we start with lead generation ads, and then we nurture recruits with emails, with remarketing ads until that final conversion of submitting your application to teach. So we utilize a variety of methods to reach our potential audience of future teachers. We do search engine marketing, display, video, various forms of paid social, and we do branded content as well. And I think what we do well, and what I imagine many of the listeners of your podcast do, is that we apply the same content loop to paid media that we apply to our own content. And we take it maybe a step further in that we A/B test absolutely everything that we put out there, and then we take the winner and do another A/B test. So we are consistently optimizing the ads that we launch into the space.
Wow. Nice. And so if we think in terms of a traditional funnel, right, is there an average lifespan of that funnel? Is it 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years?
Great question. I think that we have learned that for the majority of our applicants, it's a 2-week funnel.
Really?
From the time they start to the time they submit their application. Yeah, and it's really interesting because what I'm really interested in doing is looking at an attribution model and pulling the funnel further out. Do you start to get to know us and learn about us before you start interacting with ads? I'm really, it's really piqued my interest because I think there could be a lot of awareness touch points that we don't think of as being part of our funnel that actually may be part of our funnel.
Right. Okay. So then let's talk a little bit about, again, in the context of behaving like a for-profit business. And I think we've heard, several examples of your practices that sound very much like a for-profit business. So let's talk about that terminology that for-profit organizations are using all the time. And that's measuring success, measuring ROI. So clearly, I think one of them is all about that journey of recruiting. So that would be one, and feel free to elaborate on that. But, if I was your boss and we were having a meeting and I was asking you for an update, what are the kinds of things that you're reporting on, Stacy?
Absolutely. So you're absolutely right. We report on conversions matter a lot. And I think all of the typical things that go with that when you're looking for a really clear goal in that line. I think my boss and I often talk about channel growth and engagement. How are we growing our audience? How are we interesting more folks in the issue that we are trying to solve for in educational inequity? And how are we growing these conversations? And then for us, that naturally loops back into what are we learning from our listening? And what I love about my boss and what I love about Teach for America is that listening is always at the forefront of every discussion. What are we learning about our audience out in the world, and how does that relate to what we're doing on social media? And I think that it really forces us to be of the moment, to be nimble, to be agile, to react quickly, and to keep doing our best work.
Okay. And then what about donations? Is that something that does that fall on your shoulders, or is that a broader effort throughout the organization?
It's a broader effort throughout the organization. It doesn't fall on my shoulders in the same way that recruiting teachers does.
Okay. So recruiting teachers, that's on your plate.
That is on my plate.
All right, cool. All right. So, Stacy, one more question before I actually try to recap what we discussed here today, and that is, what kind of advice would you offer other nonprofits that are listening to this? And, maybe they're not as far along in their use of social media, of course, what we call social business. What kind of advice would you offer them?
I think I would offer you two types of advice. First, study the brands that you admire, form hypotheses about what they're doing that works, and figure out how you can take that hypothesis and try and take a small piece of it and translate it to your brand and something that might work for your brand. Look at your results, iterate it, and on you go. And I think my second piece of advice would be to study the industry, to listen to the Social Business Engine podcast, to read the tech news, to read the how-to blogs about how to use different features on different platforms, and just to slowly work through both of those things, studying brands and studying the industry. And I think that will help everyone, myself included, to continue to evolve at the rapid clip that social media requires and that Teach for America likes to keep up with.
Right. Terrific. Okay. Well, I really liked your second suggestion, by the way. That was a really good one.
Yeah.
All right, great. So, so Stacy, here is where I get to the part that actually makes me nervous, because I attempt to summarize the key points that you made so that my listener, who is often in a mobile scenario, I can kind of recap everything, and then we'll go to a final closing and we'll wrap it up. So we began this conversation by you giving us a really great overview of Teach for America. Recently celebrated your 25th anniversary. Wendy Kopp, who is the founder, she did a college senior thesis that addressed the inequity of public education, and how here you are 25 years later as a nonprofit with 50,000 teacher alumni. That is phenomenal. And how you're really addressing the issue of 16 million children who live in poverty, and how their education or their ability to get a good education should not be dependent on their zip code or the income of their family. So the recruiting teachers model is what it's all about, and to recruit teachers for a 2-year commitment in low-income areas. We talked about how you use social media, very goal-focused, really focused on building community with 3 goals. One is building awareness and affinity for the Teach for America brand, recruiting teachers for the 2-year commitment, and then, of course, your impact on donations and ongoing loyalty to those donations. You talked about the platinum rule. I love that. We all know the golden rule. The platinum rule is treat them the way they want to be treated. So you really focus on social listening, and that you really view everybody on social media as one giant focus group. And you listen to understand the why, and that every piece of content that you produce has a purpose. And it's really focused on activating that engagement and building that awareness and that affinity to bring people through your conversion funnel. We talked about the content loop, and when I asked you, well, what do you mean by that? And you said, well, you create and you iterate. So you start with listening, then you create some content that you think is relevant to the people that you're listening to and the topics that are important to them, and then you publish the content and you amplify it. And then you listen and you iterate again, and you just continue that loop, and then you scale it based on what's really, really working well for you. And I love that whole concept of, one giant focus group. And then you gave us a great example about how Craig, and I didn't get his last name, but Craig is a teacher of yours. He had over 10 years of experience, and so he had written a blog post that speaks to his concept of teaching for the cycle, which is teaching all the siblings in one family, and how when you do that, you really make an impact on that entire family. And so he had this blog post, and it performed really, really well. Lots of teachers within the TFA community were commenting on it, and then he was speaking at the alumni educators conference, and then you were doing in-the-moment listening. And you could tell that people were really, tweeting that up, and really it was really resonating with a lot of people, so that You basically, captured all of that chatter. And then there was a story written very quickly after that. And then it got so much buzz and attention that you invited Craig back to MC the 25th anniversary. And he spoke in front of 15,000 people. That's amazing. And then we talked about how you use paid media and how you use paid media to drive the recruitment conversions, your funnel. And you use lead generation ads, you're doing a lot of remarketing, pay-per-click, display, branded content, and you do A/B testing over and over again. That's amazing. Again, that's so for-profit centric. That's really fantastic. And how you really focused on recruiting teachers. And then from a measuring success standpoint, we talked about how if I was your boss, you'd be talking about all about the channel growth and engagement and reporting on how you're growing conversions and how listening is so big a part of every discussion that you have internally as it relates to everything you're doing in social media. And then the last thing we talked about was your advice for nonprofits. You said, first and foremost, study the brands that you admire. And I assume you mean all brands, not just not-for-profit, but just brands that you admire, form hypotheses, and then test them and iterate them. And then you also said to study the industry, read blogs, read tech news, maybe attend conferences, listen to podcasts like Social Business Engine and others that can be informative and educational. So, Stacy, is there anything that I either left out or you'd like to elaborate on for my summary?
I think you listened perfectly well, and that was a phenomenal content loop. And I would just add that, yes, study all brands that you admire, for-profit, not-for-profit. If you think they're doing great work, they probably are.
Terrific. Okay. Well, Stacy, where would you like to send people to learn more about you and everything that Teach for America is doing?
Yeah, so I think going to Teach for America's website is the perfect place to start. It's really our mothership. And the top stories section is where you'll find stories of teachers in our community like Craig. And if you want to chat with me on social media, if you scroll down to the footer in the website, it will link you to all of Teach for America's social media platforms. We'd love to have you come join our conversations about education. And as for myself, you are welcome to find me on LinkedIn or Twitter.
Okay. And your website, the Teach for America, is teachforamerica.org, correct?
Correct.
All right. Awesome. And my listeners know that all that's going to be linked up in the show notes page. So, Stacy, thank you so much for jumping on this podcast here today and sharing this really phenomenal story of what Teach for America is doing and the work that you're doing there in driving all of their social business activities and results. It's really a fantastic story. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a joy to be here today.
Terrific. Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Stacy Jaffe, Managing Director of Social Media and Paid Ads at Teach for America. This episode is sponsored by our very own Social Business Workshop for Business Development. To learn more about this online workshop, just visit our website at socialbusinessengine.com/workshops. Hey, are you subscribed by email to get our weekly podcast updates that we send out every Friday? If you're not and you'd like to be, just visit our subscribe page at our website. And hey, would you consider writing a review of our podcast in iTunes and sharing your sentiments so that others might discover the Social Business Engine podcast? We have a direct link to our podcast in iTunes from the website at socialbusinessengine.com/iTunes. And lastly, I invite you to engage with me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is my name, at Bernie Borges. This podcast is also on Twitter and Instagram with the same handle, at SB Engine, and our hashtag is SBE Show. Well, that is going to do it for this episode. I want to thank my guest once again, Stacy Jaffe, Managing Director of Social Media and Paid Ads at Teach for America. This is Bernie Borges of Find and Convert, wishing you continued success on your social business journey.